Hi and welcome back to another video on this channel. Thanks for joining me today. Singapore is currently in its second lockdown. It's not being called a second lockdown, but it essentially is. And so my entire family is at home and I'm not trying to make a fuss. I'm not trying to draw attention to myself. So I'm trying to make a video as quietly as I can. So do forgive my very whisperer-like voice, as well as any background noise that you might experience throughout this entire video. I hope that it kind of contributes to a more cozy environment, if you know what I mean. Today's video is going to be about the books that have changed my life. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit more about this category of videos that I've seen on YouTube, which, if you searched the title books that have changed my life, you would probably see quite a lot of videos that are already made about this topic, and definitely a lot of creators who do not talk about books normally that would make such videos about the books that have made them who they are today. Now, if you watch all these videos, you might realize that it tends to be very self-helpy. A lot of these books tend to be written for personal development, written for like how to maximize or optimize your life, which is not what I'm here for. Today's book list is going to be really very personal. It's a list of the books that really made a huge personal impact on my life, and I want to share them not really immediately to get you to read these books. I think they're excellent books in their own right, but I wanted to share these books as a way to also talk about my reading journey over the past few years, ever since I was young, and to talk about the power of literature, the power of books and reading in forming your identity. So that's going to be a slant that I'll have for this video. So if you clicked in hoping to see the next book that would change your life, unfortunately I don't think I can really provide that, because these books made a huge impact on me at specific points in my life, and I can't guarantee that they would replicate the same kind of effect for you. I really don't. I really think because of certain books that I read at certain ages, I was able to glean certain insights that would be very specific to me, but maybe in this journey you can choose to pick up some of these books as well. First of all, I want to say that I don't really remember the books I read up till I was like in my preteen years. So up till I was like 15, I don't really remember any of the books I've read, honestly. It was only when I was 16 that I started to read more intentionally. I started to read more literature. So the first book that I want to talk about is this book called The Crucible by Arthur Miller. So I have this really raggedy copy here, and this is actually a copy that I had since I was in secondary school, which is why I ever even encountered this book. So this was when I was 16 and I had to study this for my O-levels. It was the first book that made me realize the power of literature, in this case a play, because I was in a Christian school, and this was a book that was, it's about the Salem witch trials, and it's about how women were kind of targeted, they were scapegoated, and it raised a lot of questions about indoctrination. It raised a lot of questions about religious fervor, and so much about female oppression, which was quite surprising that we read this book in that context, honestly, because it was a Christian girls' school, and this is not what you should be giving to Christian girls if you want them to continue on being who they are. It made me question a lot of things that I was taught since young, and it's a very chilling read. I mean, there's so many excerpts I still remember that are so iconic from this play, and it always just rang, the idea of a witch, it's still stuck in my mind until now. I mean, now I'm still reading about witches and about Wicca, and it's really from this one play that I read when I was 16 that made me realize that there were all these gendered aspects to power and to religion. So this was the book that really opened my eyes to that. and yeah, opened so many paths down to so many things that I'm currently interested in today. Now the next book that I want to talk about is this book called Quiet. Pretty sure this is the most self-helpy book that I have in this list, and it's not really self-help. As you can tell, this edition is really old. I've had this since I was 16 as well. I think I read this when I was 16 going on to 17, and it was the book that really changed my self-perception the most in terms of my personality and my characteristics. When I was young, I was always very quiet and I was always very inside my head. I think only after reading this I realized that I could see these introverted traits as something that was empowering, and it didn't mean that I had to suddenly be extroverted, rather to use my introversion in a way that helped me along, or in a way that was different from extroverts. Like, I could use my contemplation and my comfort with myself as my advantage in doing projects and in talking to people, which, you know, isn't extroversion. It's about embracing those traits and not, you know, and not to think that being social and being introverted are like complete opposites. I shouldn't be afraid, or I shouldn't be ashamed of how much I like to be by myself, but rather I should use that as a strength. So this really changed my idea of like who I was as a person and how I should interact with others, and I still think it's pretty relevant. I still think that introversion is still a very hugely like underrepresented thing. The next book I want to talk about is this book called Trauma and Recovery, and it's by Judith Herman. This really was the first book that I read about the idea of trauma. Now, you might know the book called The Body Keeps the Score. I do think that's a lot more comprehensive and a lot more updated. For this one, this was written like pretty early on, I think in the 1990s, and that's when the idea of trauma wasn't really talked about a lot. So Judith Herman's book was pretty one of the pioneers in talking about what does trauma and, you know, recovery look like for victims of domestic abuse, as well as war veterans who were still struggling with like trauma from the war, so that's PTSD and things like that. Obviously this is a little bit more psychoanalytic. It's not so much typical psychological rigor as we might see today, but I do think that psychoanalysis provides really interesting points of comparison and a lot of food for thought as to what are fundamental psychological needs that are being disrupted and are not being met. Now, I wouldn't recommend this again today. I would recommend The Body Keeps the Score instead. But because I read this pretty early on, maybe when I was in my when I was 20 or 21, and this really shaped my understanding of what trauma is. So that's why I'm sharing it. But honestly, yeah, I would recommend The Body Keeps the Score if you want a lot more of a contemporary take on trauma. If not, I still think that this is worth a read if you are generally interested in that topic as well. Next is also a psychology book. I realized a lot of the books that really changed my mind about things are psychology books. In case you didn't know, I did study psychology as my major before I transferred into anthropology, so I still geek out a lot about psychology. It's just that I couple it with a lot of like cultural and societal things. The Noonday Demon, An Atlas of Depression by Andrew Soloman. I read this book as a library copy, so this physical copy is new, it's thrifted, and I've not read this physical copy yet, but when I read this when I was like 22, and it's basically almost everything about depression. I read this at a very low point of my life when I was struggling a lot with what depression was. Not me, but someone that I cherished a lot at that time was struggling a lot of depression, and I was just really trying to figure out like, why is there not enough resources about depression and what can I do about it? I wanted to understand every single aspect of it, and this book really gave everything to me. Like, it gave anecdotes, it gave scientific research, it gave, you know, the author's own personal insights into things. It's a really like difficult read because it is heavy, but it really changed my relationship to mental health. I don't think that the author says that, you know, flat out depression is wrong or it's bad. It's really just a symptom of something else. It's a condition of human life, and I really appreciated that perspective, because I think nowadays we tend to treat mental health conditions as things to be cured or things to be, you know, rid of. But I really don't think that. I don't really feel that way. I feel in my own personal experience, mental health is something that we all are afflicted with to some degree, to different degrees, and it doesn't work in anyone's favor to treat someone as though they have something to be cured necessarily. I really want to get rid of that very psychiatric thinking towards mental health. It's really a big picture thing, and this book really changed my mind on that. Do give it a read if you are interested in the topic of depression and you really want to dive deep into it. I would really highly recommend this book, honestly. I don't really talk about this book a lot because it's very heavy and it's very personal, but given the context of this video, I thought I would share it much more deeply. So yeah. And the next book I want to talk about is Gender Failure by Ivan Coyote and Ray Spoon. So this was a book that I read really randomly in the middle of my undergraduate years. I've always been interested in feminism and gender studies since a long time ago, and there are plenty of thinkers and writers that have really helped to shape my understanding of those fields. But this book was the book that comforted me a lot. It was the book that taught me about, you know, like the very vulnerable parts of gender identity, which I think a lot of gender studies, it doesn't really teach you that. It's very theoretical. It's very, very much like, you know, you're right, you're wrong, everything's vague, no one's right, no one's wrong. It's very like, it's fun intellectually, but it does not give you emotional comfort if you are seeking that, especially if you actually do struggle with your gender identity and presentation on a day-to-day basis, like me last time. This book is a book by two authors who talk about their experiences navigating the gender binary and then subsequently proclaiming themselves to be gender failures, and I guess being non-binary or being gender fluid in some way. I was like, yo, it really just clicked in my mind, so many things about failing as a gender and how nobody passes truly, and how there's all these really funny comedic moments in between all these really terrible situations that you're just like, I just can't deal with gender anymore. And this book was the book that allowed me to feel that way, allowed me to feel like, yeah, you know what? I shouldn't care so much. Yeah, you know, it's okay to feel like you don't want to talk about gender or you don't care about how people perceive you as a particular gender or not. And I love this book so much. I would recommend it to anyone, honestly, and it really changed my understanding of how I saw myself as a gendered individual. I think really because of this book, it really like gave me permission to say like, no, I want to have a gender expression that I feel comfortable in, and if the feminine expression makes me feel so alienated and isolated, then I do have the right to find an expression that is more authentic to me. Moving on, this is probably the only fiction book in this list, and that is Beauty is a Wound by Eka Kurniawan. This is a novel about a woman called Dewi Ayu and how it's a very folklore heavy, very mythical and fantastical novel that combines a lot of colonial, post-colonial, contemporary imagery into this really like compelling multi-generational story. Everything about it captivated me, and everything about it made me feel so alive, at the same time made me understand so many hidden parts of myself. So in case you didn't know, like, yes, I do have some associations with Indonesia because my parents are from there, but all my life I found it very difficult to relate to that culture, or to even like perceive myself in any sort of way that is associated with that culture. So reading this book made me so curious. It made me want to embrace this Indonesian heritage of mine, although in small ways, of course. But it really opened like oh my god, I can and I deserve to read books and stories that are more of people that are like similar to me, or that there are all these stories out there that I can actually see myself in, and to, you know, find a piece of myself in all these books I read. So it's not really just about the book itself, but also what the book represented to me. Because of this book, I was much more open to reading Singlit, as well as to reading translated literature from the region. Before this, like, I never really thought about reading literature or like fiction ever again. But because of this book, I was like, yeah, you know, I can and I should and I will welcome fiction again, especially fiction that is closer to me in those aspects. And Kurniawan's writing is really just so phenomenal. I think it really made me realize, or it made me rediscover the beauty of the writing that local authors or regional authors can offer, which I have not been considering for such a long time. The last book I want to share is this book called Pleasure Activism: The Politics of Feeling Good by Adrienne Marie Brown. I did talk about this book several times on this channel, if I'm not wrong. This was the book that really guided me a lot in terms of what activism should look like and how I should go forth trying to find my identity in the world, and in focusing my efforts in what brings us joy, but also what brings about social justice. This book really came at a time where I really needed it. It was a book that, you know, taught me that yes, you know, activism shouldn't be that of suffering. It should be that of hope and joy and liberation, of pleasure. And activism is so intrinsically tied to your love for yourself, not just your, you know, intellectual and emotional self, but your physical self as well. And in celebrating all these selves of yourself and other people, you can bring about really substantial change. Still learning a lot about this sort of activism. I'm still trying to figure out strategies that work for me, but this is the book that, you know, made me want to commit to providing value to the world in a way that centers joy and centers hope. I'm still learning how to do that, still kind of new to that, but yes, this is the book that helped me do that, or helped me discover that aspect of myself. Now that's the end of the video. I realized that it went on a lot longer than I expected. I didn't know that I would talk so long about some of these books, but yeah, so these are the books that really changed my life in a way that they have allowed me to maybe discover new things or expose me to new ideas, but at the same time also helped me rediscover who I am. Reading and having those books, it gives you permission to feel certain things. It gives you the tools and the framework to regard things in the real world. I think that's really the true power of literature and of reading, which I hope people can talk more about, because like I'm not necessarily reading books to develop myself to be this optimal productivity machine, but rather I'm reading books to learn more about who I am, how I am a person in relation to the world, how I am in relation to other people. I would really love to see more content on books that have, you know, this personal significance to people, rather than books that groom you or tame you into a specific kind of person. Thanks so much for watching all the way. Do let me know if you enjoyed the video. And thanks so much for the support on the previous video. I didn't expect it to get that many views. Honestly, I thought it was a pretty random topic. I hope that you're having a good day. If not, I hope that you'll have a better day tomorrow. Please get enough rest and take care of yourself and your loved ones. I've also linked a few links below that are mutual aid efforts in different areas, so do check them out accordingly and do whatever you can to spread the news and to donate. Yeah, do share down below, like maybe the one book that really changed your life, really changed the way you saw yourself or the world. I would love to know what those books are. So thanks again for staying, and see you in the next video. Bye.